Yeah, that's right, we are back. This week's been pretty exciting because I've been experimenting with setting up my Winkowski Dope Planet deck as a Carver SurfSkate. I recently put together a video where I set up and tested out the Winkowski Dope Planet deck. I really enjoyed it. It's got that amazing Cruise Missile 2 concave. It's got the same tail as my beloved Kendall Snake, and it's got a little bit more width up there where the front foot goes. While I was trying out the Dope Planet deck, it did occur to me that it would make an excellent basis for a SurfSkate. It's got that brilliant surfy sort of outline and feel, and it's got the more generous 15-inch wheelbase, which would really lend itself to getting those carvy turns going. I also put together a video a while back where I tested out the Carver C5 SurfSkate trucks. Now, I bought these as a retrofit pack, and their build is slightly detuned SurfSkate trucks that are good for going around the park and maybe even going backwards a little bit, getting up there on the coping and doing some lip tricks. Now, the Winkowski deck is starting to get a bit of a reputation in the SurfSkate community as a really nice SurfSkate deck, so I thought I'd give it a whirl, put those C5 trucks on, see how she feels. Fixing the trucks on is dead simple. It's just 4 bolts either side. Now, these trucks do come with an 1/8 inch riser. I decided to bolt them straight onto the deck. I really like that direct feel, and I was also thinking about doing a few lip tricks, so I didn't want the board to be unnecessarily high. If you really want to go for safety and make sure you get no wheel bite, you should definitely put those risers in, but I was quite confident that with the shape of the Winkowski deck, I could get away with it. My main focus with this setup was to get in the pool and do a bit of grinding on that pool coping. So I took the liberty of grinding down the kingpin on the front truck. Now, this comes supplied a little bit proud, and I really didn't want that digging in. Another thing that's worth noting is the reverse kingpin setup on the front truck puts the wheelbase back about 1/2 inch. Some people like to re-drill those front truck holes, put the truck forwards to make the wheelbase the same again. I didn't want to mess with my Dope Planet deck at this stage, and I also didn't want to change the pocket in the nose. There's not an awful lot of nose there anyway, and I was planning to do a little bit of backwards riding and a few fakey tricks. To complete the setup, I popped on some OJ Team Rider wheels. These are 61mm in diameter. They've got a 97A hardness, and I've always liked the way they scoot around on the concrete. Now, the main selling point of these trucks is the way they turn, and I couldn't wait to get out there on the flatland and just get into a little bit of carving. You can achieve that SurfSkate phenomenon of not having to push off and just being able to pump through the turns on the flat and keep your momentum going. And I really enjoyed the feel of being able to carve in this fashion on what I consider to be a pretty regular skateboard deck. I tried out a few power slide turns. Those wheels broke out nicely, made a great sound on the concrete. And I also tried going around the tight pump track. The wheels on the tarmac, they were skittling along because they are pretty hard for tarmac. Now, the biggest difference between the SurfSkate carving radius and regular trucks is the front truck turns way more, and that gives you a sort of elliptical carve, where the back is more grippy and the front is more slidey. Next up, I was eager to get down to the skate park and try these trucks in the skate pool, and oh my goodness, with a little bit of practice, I found I could get some really tight turns, really pump through the shoulders, get that elliptical carving radius working for me. With the 60mm wheels as well, possible to get quite a lot of speed going, and I really enjoyed putting together a few carving lines. I found that when I started going for those double truck carving grinds, The elliptical turning radius of the surf trucks meant it was possible for the front truck to get on the coping and the back truck to stay below the coping. This sent me off willy-nilly into a sort of unintentional willy grind. I found the solution was to be really positive with my carving action. Actively swish the shoulders and the hips through, and that put the back truck up on the coping, and I managed to get a few double truck carving grinds. Next up, I was keen to see how these trucks felt riding backwards. So a little bit of rock to fakie action and got bucked straight off on the first attempt. Now going backwards is the SurfSkate setup's Achilles heel. That front truck's like a shopping trolley, and when you go backwards, you've got that as the new back truck. So I found just resetting my front foot a little bit behind the bolts, this sort of accounted for that axle being backwards a bit, and also making sure my technique was really finessed. And I kept my knees bent, kept my centre of gravity low, and I managed to find that I could go back down the waterfall and execute a really remedial fakie carve. That felt really scary, and trying to pump back up the waterfall made the whole thing wobble off. I set my goal as trying to pump back up the waterfall and try and get back into a tail stall, and after a few attempts I managed to get a fakie carve, back round and then up into that tail stall. On regular indie trucks I really enjoy riding backwards, and I've managed to work my fakie carves up to fakie carve grinds in the pool. So it was a little bit disheartening to go back to feeling like a beginner at those fakie carves. It felt like with a bit more practice I would get used to that feel, but it definitely is a compromise with the carving feel being really nice, but the backwards feel being significantly harder. I thought I'd try out a fakie rock as well, managed to just about get away with it, but that axle being half an inch back changed the amount of purchase my front foot could achieve, so I found I just needed to relax on the pressure on the nose just to bring those back wheels in. Next up, it was time to get up on that coping and do some grinds. With a bit of practice, these trucks grind really nicely. They've got a different feel to the Indies, and they also sound different. They're a little bit more high pitch when you rattle across that coping. The Indies have a sort of deeper growl to them. The axle on the C5 trucks is a little bit thinner, and that makes it more pointy than the independent trucks. So as I went round, I found that if my foot pressures were a little bit off, it was possible for that front truck just to dig in to the coping, and got bucked straight over the front, and that was pretty emotional. So to counteract this, I just made sure I went really fast and also stayed a little bit more in the back seat, so a little bit more pressure on that back foot, try not to be so front foot heavy, and I managed to get the grinds to travel round and not dig in. Another thing I had to adjust for was the amount of spring I got off of my pump up onto the coping. Now the bushings on the C5 trucks are quite thick and they're super springy, so I was finding that my normal pump up onto the coping was sending me straight out the top. So I just had to relax that pump down a bit. As soon as I got the feel, I was back in the game. I found that tight carving radius really helped get up on the coping, especially for things like the rolling grind, where I could do a little carve just before I approached the coping, and that sort of sent me straight on top, and I locked in pretty much every attempt. I also needed to make a slight adjustment to the way that I locked in to my 50-50 grinds. That front truck's a bit more wobbly, so again I just needed to be a little bit more sensitive on that front foot, make sure that the lock-in was achieved, but I wasn't really leaning loads on that front foot, otherwise it could catch and I'll be off the front. As my confidence grew, I thought I'd chance my arm with a board slide to fakie, and oh my goodness, getting into the board slide was a treat. Again, I think the way the SurfSkate turns just spat me up on top for the board slide. But I'm not going to lie to you, coming back in fakie at a rate of knots is not the strong point of these trucks. I came a cropper a few times and I had to call it a day with the board slide to fakie. I found these trucks worked really nicely for those basic sort of coping tricks. They felt pretty much the same as indie trucks for the front side axle stall. And for the backside axle stall, I found I just needed to be a little bit more in the back seat and not push so hard on that wobbly front truck. If I did that, the board just locked in really nicely and riding away was absolutely no problem. Well, that's it for this video on the Winkowski SurfSkate experiment, and I have to say, I really enjoyed it. That carving feel is the main plus point. Just carving around the pool felt so good. Trying to get those turns really nice and tight, pumping out of them and trying to channel my inner surfer. I think the main consideration here is the compromise between carving performance and being able to go backwards. If you really like going backwards and you're not so fussed about doing tight turns, then I would say just normal trucks are probably the way to go. If you're in the mood for some surfy, and also you don't mind a bit of a challenge for riding backwards, or you don't do too much riding backwards at all, then I reckon the C5 SurfSkate trucks are a really good choice and they are a lot of fun. I'm going to take a little bit of time running both setups. I'm going to take them both to the park, and depending on what mood I'm in, I'll ride whichever one suits that mood. With regards to going backwards, I feel I should reiterate that the C5 trucks are significantly easier to go backwards on than a regular SurfSkate setup. But they are definitely trickier than the Indy trucks. Please do leave any questions you have in the comments below, and of course hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit subscribe. I make new videos every week. You can also follow me on Instagram @JohnBishopSkate. As ever, my name's been John Bishop and I'm a middle-aged guy learning how to skate.